fishing, it's in my soul.
Welcome to the Salt Strong Podcast, disrupting fishing entertainment as you know it. Prepare to laugh. Prepare to get to know fishing legends in a whole new and unfiltered way. And on occasion, you might even learn a thing or two about fishing. Here's your host, Joe Simons. Like diamonds.
Hello, Salt Strong Nation. Joe Simons, like diamonds. We're back again talking about rod building secrets, revelations, ahas, breakthrough moments from the rod building class there at Mudhole. If you guys don't know Mudhole, I believe they're probably the largest distributor of rod building parts, accessories, components, blanks, etc. And they're here in Central Florida. And, we've been working with them for quite some time on building some custom rods for our insider members, which is coming next year. We're really pumped about that. And they had a rod building class. They do this. How often, guys? Do they do?
It's like once a month, but the type of rod they build, they do everything. So the type of rod they build fluctuates. This was the inshore spinning rod class.
And so it's a full weekend. So you come in Friday night, you kind of get stuff prepped all day Saturday, and then on Sunday you finish up and you walk out with, what would probably be a $300 retail rod, right? I mean, super light, built to custom, obviously. And you guys both did yours a little bit different. We'll talk about that. But afterwards, Luke and I hung out that Sunday night, and Luke was like, holy smokes. He's like, not only was it cool that we got to build our own custom rods, but he's like, man, I had some like legit aha moments that no one has ever talked about in the rod building world, right? Because most of the rods we buy from some of our favorites, TFO and St. Croix and stuff, they're mass manufactured, right? I mean, it's just no surprise. It's most things in life. If you want to scale, you got to build a ton of them and distribute it far and wide. And so many of us, we don't really know all the details, the fine details that go into it, from how to space your guides, right? Hey, why are these two guides spaced this much versus that? Why is this one balanced a little bit heavier here on this side? Why does Justin like long butts? I don't know. Some people are just like that. But Luke had some really, really big, like, wow moments, and almost to the point where he's like, man, some of these guys at Mudhole are so smart. Just like when you have some of those teachers that kind of take some stuff for granted, and they're like, whoa, slow to say that again. And I was like, all right, we got to get you guys on the podcast to share some of this stuff. So I got Luke, got Justin, both you guys were there, along with a few other insider members showed up as well. And I know Matt Lanier was there also, one of our other employees. And where do you guys want to start? What was a big aha moment?
Well, I'll start with I'll say the number one key lesson learned when you're dealing with custom rods, because custom rods get expensive, whether you do it yourself or you hire somebody to do it. It's going to be expensive, right? It's very hard to outbeat the mass-produced rods because they buy everything in huge quantities and get the cost down significantly. But the number one thing for if you're looking to get a custom rod from a builder is, if they don't ask exactly which reel you're using, be pretty leery of it, because a big part of their performance is matching the specific rod and the guide spacing, as Joe mentioned, to a specific reel. And that goes by brand and size, because as the diameter of the spool changes, the placement of the guides needs to change accordingly. And it's unfortunately every reel, just like rods, where like, the same reason that a medium power rod from one brand is different than a medium power rod from another brand, a 3,000 size reel from one brand is different than a 3,000 reel from another. So you really have to, the rod needs to be, if it's going to be done properly, if you're going to pay extra or put your time into it, you might as well make sure that it's designed exactly for the reel. So that was the biggest aha that I had. I've always just gone, okay, here's a good rod. All right, here's a good reel. Let's put them together and it's going to be awesome. That's not necessarily the case. And it was very evident as Justin and I were doing our casting demonstrations, when we kind of put the eyes where we thought they would need to be. And then we would cast and you could watch the line go through. And it was very telling once we did that. So that was my biggest aha moment from that course, is how important those guide spacing is. And specifically it involves the reel and the size of it.
And remember, even when we first started working with Mud Hall, we went there and spent the day with them, and we're talking about doing, a custom rod in kind of mass production, not the point of St. Croix and TFO, but, many, a couple thousand at least rods for our members. And the first thing they asked was, all right, what reel are you guys going to use, right? Not like what color do you want, or what do you want your threads, or what logo do you want on there? It's like, what reel are we going to pair this up with to get it balanced, right? And then also for the guide spacing. And it was almost like building a car, right? Without talking about what engine you're going to put in there. We've got to make sure, we're not going to put a massive Corvette engine in a little Prius. You got to think through some of that stuff. So that was an aha moment for me the day that I was there with them, when they put so much focus on basically building the rod for the reel that you're going to be using. And not to say that, you can't have a good rod like a TFO, let's just say, that would work with many reels, because it can. It's not like it's only one and one. But it does help if you want to get the ultimate performance. It certainly helps. So to talk about that, explain when you would want guides lower. How many guides? Is it 10 guys? Is it 7? Is it when would you go more or less? How far do you space them out, et cetera?
Go for it, Justin.
Yeah. I mean, so for me, they use terminology that's new to us. I mean, as consumers, as fishermen, we're not using a lot of these fancy terms that the rod builders are using all the time to talk about spacing. And the first thing that we do with trying to determine how many guides on a rod is a static deflection test, which what happens is they mount the rod, they apply some resistance to the tip, and then on that curvature of the bend of the rod, they want to make sure that the line is going to travel in the same manner of the bend of the rod. And they don't want big gaps in between, this guide and that guide. So that's when you kind of start splitting hairs and saying, do you need 8 guides, 9 guides, 10 plus a tip? You want to make sure that transition of the line as it's rolling throughout the bend of the rod is even and smooth. So the last bit of guides that you put in a rod is really just going to depend on the power. I'm sorry, the action of the rod. We'll get into power later, because we had a whole long conversation about that too. The action of the rod. So a fast action rod is only going to bend in that, let's say, first third of the tip. Could be first quarter, general range. The bend is going to be at the tip. A moderate fast rod or a moderate rod is going to bend further down the rod. So line is going to, that with that rod bending more, line is going to move at a different way around that rod. So you need guides in different areas and more or less to support that travel of the line. So this static deflection test that we did, where they just took I think they had a 7-foot rod and the guide set up, and he ran line through all the guides, we could kind of see like, all right, here's a little bit of tolerance. We can move this guide here and move this guide here and get them closer together. So there's not uneven pressure throughout the whole bend of the rod. It's fluid. Like the line and the pressure on the blank is even all the way throughout. These little tiny tweaks were crazy. I mean, things that we take for granted, we just assume when we grab a rod that the guides are placed properly, but do we know? I mean, if we popped it on that and we were to test it to our custom, like, were there some slight tolerances that could have been changed one way or another to allow for better performance in the rod when under a load? It's those things that we can see on the custom side that, we really have to test now against all the other production rods we've bought in years past.
Do you guys do that? Were you able to do the deflection on them? Let's just say normal. Okay.
100%. Yeah. And those last guides, that the benefit of doing the proper spacing is it helps protect from the rod breaking, like on a high stick situation. It's impossible to never, especially if you're kayak fishing, you have to get the fish close to you. That rod is going to be pretty well maxed out. And if those guides aren't spaced properly, that's going to put a load on one of the vulnerable parts of the rod, which is toward the tip. And that's the benefit of the spacing of a custom spacing, where you can actually literally see exactly where the bend points are and just give extra security with the guide. Pretty cool. Another thing that was interesting to me is the very first step, and it was finding the spline, and that's where the rod will naturally bend a little bit easier and it'll just bend more naturally. And what they're saying is that most mass producers don't even bother doing that. They just run the rod through a machine or whatever. And I always heard about it, but I've never felt it, because once all the stuff's on it, you can't really feel it quite as easily. But when you have a blank blank rod, like a rod blank, I should say, without anything on it. And basically would put the tip on the table and then just bend it. And you can like, as it's bent, you can rotate it around. And it was shockingly noticeable where the spine was. So was that for you too, Justin?
Yeah. So this is something cool that I thought about after the class. The spine or spline, it's kind of like a universal term for the blank of a rod. Like we mentioned before, rods are sheets of carbon fiber cut and wrapped on this mandrel in such a way that the rod might be supported like power wise 360 degrees, but there's going to be kind of a spot where your rod will roll and it'll be like not a flat spot, but a part where when you go to bend the rod, it's going to want to bend a certain way more naturally. And that's with the majority of rods until you get into these super, super fancy high-end $300, $400 rods where they're using carbon tape and certain types of carbon wraps to where it eliminates the need of having a spine. But we're talking 90% plus of production rods do have a spine, and you identify that before you put any of the components on the rod, because you need to know exactly where you're going to mark where that bend is and the underside, so you know where you're going to place your guides, and you swap it, whether it's spinning rod or a bay cast rod. Obviously, they'll both bend either way, but your rod has a tendency or preference to bend one way, and you got to find out where that is on each blank.
That's pretty cool. So find the spline. So why spine versus spline?
It could have been me even mispronouncing. I don't know.
Tomato. No, I mean, I've heard both. Like I've heard spine. It's, it's 6 of one, half a dozen in the other.
What about the other dozen?
I don't know.
No.
It's still a mystery. So the running guides is really about the guides closest to the tip. That's really about protecting the rod from breaking. Is kind of like the macro view, just to understand the guides. And the very first 3 guides closest to the reel, that's what's controlling the casting distance for that matter. It's basically condensing that line from the oscillating off of the reel to shooting through those running guides. And the placement of those, that was the biggest thing on the casting performance. Is the placement of those very first 3 guides was a very big deal. When I say very big deal, right, it won't go from casting, 20 feet versus 100 feet, but I bet you it'll probably be like I would say at least a 10 to 20% swinger. We weren't measuring the cast, but you can noticeably see when this very first guide, this is the biggest guide closest to the reel, when it's placed out too far, now your line is prone to hit the rod as it's shooting out. And then if this very first guide is too close to the reel, the line bunches up right here and it can cause wind knots. And so that's been an issue with one of the rods that I have, where I have a rod. It was designed for a smaller reel and I put a bigger reel on it. Now the line is going off in larger diameter rolls, and this guide placement for that reel is now too close. And so I've had the line bunching and sometimes even like wrapping on this, or getting kind of starting knots right on this first guide, because it's just too much. It's not enough room to help those coils flatten out and then shoot through these running guides. That was very interesting. I never really put much thought into it. It makes total sense now, but I never really thought much about the actual purpose of the close guides to the reel versus the close guides to the tip. 2 totally different really usages.
That's cool. So what about guide size? There's some people out there swearing by micro guides, and you got some people say it's horrible. Do you guys talk about that in terms of the size of the different guides and micro guides in particular?
Yeah, we kind of tiptoed around. I mean, we talked about it briefly, but we moved on from it. So the microwave guide system, as the coaches, the guys we're talking about, it's great for those people. Let's say if you're a live bait or a bait fisherman, for example, and you're kind of doing a lob cast, the way that the diameter of those guides choke down without a lot of like aggressive force to the cast. If you're just lobbing a cast, it's great. It's going to cast accurately. You're going to get a good amount of distance. But if you're an artificial guy, if you're like Luke and I, where when you go to cast, you've got that whip right at the end of the cast, and you've got all this force and momentum pushing through the guides, for 2,500 size spinning reels and bigger, it's kind of a limiting factor because the line's coming off the reel faster, or there's really not as much of a transition. So having those microwave guides are fine for people that they would say novices. They'd say people that were kind of getting into the sport, and you just want a guide that's not going to have a lot of wind knots, and you're just lightly casting, just having to go in for a joyride is kind of what I call it. But if you're really trying to punch into the wind or get some like extreme distance out of your cast with 10-pound braid, the microwave guides, if you're like whipping your cast, it's going to work against you. So it's really not for us as like hardcore artificial guys, but if you don't have a really aggressive cast, it could work in your favor.
Yeah, and even the size too. So the microwave, that's like the ultimate example of condensing really fast. So it basically has like the first 3 guides in one, where normally you have one guide that's pretty wide, and then like 6 to 9 inches further up is the next one, which condenses a little bit more. And then another like 6 to 7 inches, I believe, is the recommended length is the final one. And the microwave kind of does all that at once, where it's like, it's one ring. Do you have one? I don't know if you have one near, I don't have one of those rods to show, but it has the one guide. And then like literally like a 1/4 inch above it, there's a condensing to the smaller, like running guide size. So it all happens right away. And as Justin said, it's for somebody with a hard cast that it can actually hurt performance.
Cool.
And so, but as far as size, what they're saying is that we went with size, I believe is 20. Justin, correct me if I'm wrong. Like this very first guide closest to the reel is a size 20. And for a 20, a 2000, a 20, or even some 3000 reels, that's the norm. I found even with this 20, I think I need to go up to 25 next time. Cause I usually just try to, like, when I've been throwing the bomber a lot. So it's a heavy lure, just launching it down flats, power fishing. I've even with all my rods with this smaller size eye, I have had some issues. Granted, I always like I probably put a little bit more line on my reels than I probably should have just for max distance. But my next one, I'm going to go up to a 25 and see how that is. And while I was there, like, it was fun. Like it was actually a really good time. So I actually bought a lot of the equipment now. So I'll start making my own rods, and it'll be really cool to get the different size guides and test to see, like, I still haven't seen a detailed test on the microwave versus the size 20 versus a size 25. It'd be really interesting to have the same blank and just wrap the rod without epoxy in it. And I can actually change those guides around. Like, I'm really excited to actually do some little bit more accurate tests. Because I haven't, just nobody who makes the microwave rods has like the same blank with the different guides on it. So the only way to actually do that test is just to make it.
That's cool. What else besides guides and making sure that you're, really kind of building a rod for whatever reel you're going to be using? What were some other ahas where you guys like, all right, repeat that again? Taking notes?
Well, for me, is actually just kind of like a construction put together thing. We have a lot to talk about in terms of performance, but having worked with a rod company for a number of years and better understanding how all of these parts and pieces come together on a rod, I was kind of fascinated with how they're attaching the cork, the reel seat, the foregrip, epoxy to the blank of the rod. Because I brought up something I thought was really interesting is when I had worked with Star Rod, I noticed a lot of rods from guide guys and offshore guys, they would have heavy duty offshore rods and their reel seats would spin. And sometimes I would see the reel seats spin on an inshore rod as well, but stuff. And I wondered.
Oh, you're freezing up a little bit there, Justin.
Yeah, connection's a little rough here.
Mr. Roboto.
So I can continue on with that while Justin gets reconnected, but it's the amount of epoxy in the handle is a big deal, and that's what causes any sort of movement down here from the foregrip to the seat to the final grip. That's all due to just not having enough epoxy or not having very good epoxy. And a lot of the mass produced rods has very little, right? Because the epoxy is expensive, right? When you're building 10,000 rods at a time, right? If you can save a cent per rod, like that's a big deal, or a few cents or whatever.
Yeah, but it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah, but whatever.
What my friend here is trying to say is that love is blind.
You can imagine.
Wedding crashers. What my friend here is trying to say is that love is blind. But so they do a lot of rod repair, right? And so part of the class too is they teach how to fix things that are broken, like for if you're having a rod, like an issue with the butt itself or with the guides, it's actually pretty easy to fix, which was a surprise as well. But they've repaired a lot of rods, seats, and butts and all that. And they were just saying it was shocking how a lot of the mass produced rods, how little epoxy they use, to the point where it's very easy for it to get unhinged, like Justin was saying, where it can start spinning. And it's simply just by not putting much epoxy. So Justin, go forward. I think you look like you're better connected now. Yeah, you look great. Right. You look great.
Oh, wow. Thank you. Thank you. Cleanly shaven, everything. Yeah. Appreciate it. Yeah, it was just the fastener that they use to mount the reel seat onto the blank. They were saying, hey, in mass-produced rods, it could be like a coil of yarn. It could be like a little strip of cardboard. And then they just like a little swirly of epoxy, and that's it. And when we did it, we had tape arbors. So we had 3 locations on this very specific, I think it's a Fuji TVS reel seat. So it's got the exposed blank to it. And we had tape arbors added at very specific points and just gooped it up. He's like, that is where your reel seat's going to sit. You need to make sure that the thickness of each of these tape arbors is about the same, and that there's some resistance sliding the reel seat over the tape arbors and the epoxy so that when you get it on there, it's not going anywhere. It's reinforced heavily in 3 key locations. So, I mean, just the amount of love put into something that I'm sure a lot of people think, just goop it up and slide on a reel seat. No, like there's a lot more to every aspect of making sure on this build of the rod that there's a lot of quality controls being taken into it. So the gluing, I mean, there were some things, Luke, that you did where you're like, I'm going to add a little bit of extra glue in the butt. I'm going to like just glue the crap out of this section here, because when that epoxy hardens, it's support. And as long as you're not really getting it on the cork, or it's not, it's more of an aesthetic issue and you get a smudge here and there, it's more of a benefit to you to have more, especially when you're attaching these parts here on the rod. More is better in this case.
And so I noticed you have cork up on top. Luke, you don't, or yours fell off?
I went no foregrip on mine just to test it out.
Yeah. And what do you think?
It's good. I mean, it saved a little bit of weight. Like mine's like 4.4 ounces. Justin, what was yours? 4.6 or something.
Yeah.
Ooh. Save a little bit of weight. As far as using, I have gotten it out of the water. It feels great. I kind of like the grip that we've been doing on our prior on the rods that Mudhole actually built for us. I like that better. It has a foregrip, but it's smaller and it's ergonomic. So that's my favorite, because when I'm casting without the foregrip, like the finger that's right here, that's getting the brunt of that whip, like the dart cast, it kind of digs into it's just not very comfortable. It's much more comfortable with the foregrip. But I really like having the retrieve where now I have my fingers on the blank itself. So now I can have the ultimate feel of strikes. But with that smaller foregrip that we have on the custom rods that we're going forward with, it's a smaller foregrip. It's still ergonomic. It's comfortable to cast, but it's small enough to where I can still put my finger out and have my pointing finger on the blank as I'm retrieving. That's a big deal, because just having just all the amount of epoxy that we put on here, and just the fact that cork is it really kind of deadens a little bit of the feel. It's for comfort. It's like a good blend of comfort and feel. There's nothing better than having your finger on the blank itself. And so we also went with the exposed blank in the reel seat itself, which is, again, that's another point where you can actually feel the blank and just have better overall performance on the actual feel and strikes and everything.
You can feel little minnows biting it.
That's right. You can feel them looking at it, Joe. It's that good.
Wow, that's powerful. All right. So what else? What was some other aha moments that you guys learned at the Mudhole rod building?
I'll say one is just the epoxy on the guides themselves. They have a pretty cool pretty cool process where it's, less is more, right? Every little bit of epoxy you put out here is going to just add more weight to the tip. And that's just going to take the balance of the rod more tip heavy than it would otherwise be. And so a cool thing they do is they first of all get the epoxy and they have it in this little spinner thing. So it's constantly spinning around. Like, this is my first time ever doing epoxy. And it looks like a store-bought rod. Like, I was super impressed with how easy it was. But one unique thing they do is that after they put the epoxy on, is that they recommend heating it up. And it's some special, I forget what heat mixture it is, but it's something that it doesn't leave any sort of like burn residue. But what it does, it just kind of heats off any of the excess. So this is like the cleanest looking possible way to solidify the real seats. It is crazy. Or the guides, where there's like hardly any bulge and it's just super smooth, and surely saved a lot of weight. And so all of them are like that. So that was kind of like a unique thing, because I have some rods that, like, at these little junctures where these guides come on the rods, it's like a big mound. It's like a really big mound of epoxy. And granted, right, it means it's not going to go anywhere, but it's also just adding unnecessary weight. So that was one cool thing.
Cool. Justin, anything else?
Just little things. When I would go to wrap my guides and then run it with the epoxy, I had it bunch up in a couple areas, but I can't really get the rod all the way down on camera. So right here at this corner piece of every single guide, they would warn me and they'd say, hey, when you're applying this epoxy to the rod and it's spinning, just be mindful of how far up you're taking that epoxy, because you're going to get like this bulge in this pocket right here. And while that's fine, it's going to be a nuisance to you when you get into your first fish and the rod bends and you hear like a little click, and it's that bulge of epoxy that's like stacked up in this little corner. And so what we did is I did put some on, and while it was spinning, they noticed that it bunched up, and they said, take a piece of thread, and what we're going to do is we're going to get it to where the guides are going to be up at the top. Take a little thread and kind of like saw down with the thread the little spots of epoxy that are on the top side of each guide, so you don't have that bulge buildup. So the first time you catch a fish, you're not hearing all these cracks and panicking, thinking, oh my God, my rod's going to break. And it's just the epoxy that's kind of wearing in. And because there was too much of it, and it's like connecting in the top section, when those guides bend down, you hear that snap, and it's that little booger of epoxy that kind of like breaks off the rod.
Oh, booger, bulge, yeah. Longer butts. So why do you like longer butts, Justin? That's what everyone wants to know.
I need like a cup of coffee for that one. So I am an advocate. I prefer long butts. And this is kind of like I don't know.
He likes long butts and he cannot lie. English can't deny. Walks up with a little bit.
This is like a red pill, blue pill debate, right? So I like longer butt sections on a rod because when I'm fighting a fish, all right, I want to fight the fish with as much of my elbow as I can, or more of my arm. If that butt section only came down to like right here, then I feel like I'm only using my forearm to fight the fish. And if I have a longer butt, sometimes I can tuck it up underneath my elbow or along the side of my body. And if I'm fighting a big fish, I can turn that fish away from structure a little easier. I just prefer to use more of my arm in working the lure and fighting fish than just my forearm. I feel like that my wrist and my forearm would get tired if that's all I'm doing all day long. Hello, that's a fan.
Oh, boy.
And it's solid. We're good, ladies and gentlemen. Rod's fine.
That's a secret right there by itself, to make sure your rods last longer is
this is my healthy reminder to be mindful of everything I do in here.
All right, so it's your elbow. So are you also like, when you've gotten your first fight and all, you didn't even throw any punches, you're just all elbow?
I've had a lot of practice. Oh yeah.
All right, Luke, but you're different, Luke. Luke punches with his fist, old school.
Yeah, old school. I'm old school. Yeah, I like small butts, and I can't deny.
You can't deny.
Yeah, so I went with a shorter one, and the reason why I like is I do a lot of paddle fishing, and I just do a lot of casts. So I'm usually power fishing. I just want the least amount of issues happening on the butt section where I can just, if the wind's going and my back's to the wind, my shirt's blown forward and I'm doing a quick cast, I don't want this butt to hook onto my shirt and just cause any trouble. So I like the shorter one. It's still, like just like mine, when I'm fighting the fish, it comes about there. So I got like a couple more inches to totally go down my whole elbow. And I'm usually fishing the 10-pound line. So I have like 3 pounds of drag. So I'm not trying to catch a tarpon with 50-pound braid and use a short butt. But for like the finesse type fishing, I just like the short butts because even just the most bangs for your buck lengthwise. So I can now have this is a 7.6 rod. But as far as casting distance, it's all that really matters for casting distance is tip speed. So how fast is that lure shooting off from the tip of your rod on the cast, and the longer, just like a basic tool, right? The longer the distance is, the faster the tip speed is going to be with the same motion. So I can have a easier cast and get more tip speed simply by going with a shorter bud, which means that there's a longer casting section. So for me, for my lighter rods, like for my just normal inshore rods, 10, 15 pound braid, and I just like the shorter butts just for that reason, just kind of ease of performance. But for the bigger stuff, if I'm dock fishing and I'm going to the 20 or 30 pound line, then I go with pretty much all those rods have longer butts. It really started with TFO. Like TFO was the first rod that I ever got that had a short butt. And it's like 10 inches from where the reel shoots off of the rod to the very butt. That's pretty short. Many of the rods are like 13, 14-ish. And I liked it. I was doing a lot of kayak fishing that time. And it's like, man, this is really cool. And then I took it out on the boat. It's like, man, I can just feel like I cast with less effort. And it's true, right? That is the case. So now I have a hard time going to the longer butt rods for that finesse fishing, just because I'm used to it. Yeah, but it's just like everything. It's a lot of it's what you're used to.
Yeah, but especially in kayaks, paddle boards.
Oh, it's a huge difference.
No brainer for me to have a shorter one. Otherwise, you're getting stuff caught on you, and it's just, man, it's so much more easy to make a great cast.
But it's best to have some of each. I mean, right? So you're not always going to be like finesse fishing up in open water where you can have your drag really loose. Like when you're in the like dock fishing or kind of heavy structure fishing on inlets or whatever, you definitely want to have more leverage, and that's where you need to go have it down to the elbow. But again, the cool thing about building your own, you can specify however you want and test it out.
Yep. All right. So you guys briefly talked about action in the beginning. I think you kind of teased maybe talking about power. How did you guys choose your blank? Did everyone get the same blank? I don't. How did that work?
Ours were actually kind of assigned to us from just from talks with the custom rods we've been doing, where this was a slight tweak to the blank that we've been testing out so far. And so it was one, hey, like you guys need to try this blank out. You might as well use that for the rod that you build. So ours is kind of given, but they have, I mean, if you go to their site or get their catalog, it is crazy how many blanks they have. They literally have everything you could possibly imagine, plus some. And a lot of it is really just kind of, user preference, your casting style. Like if you're a really fast caster, like a fast tip, maybe even extra fast action is probably for you. And that means that the action is where on the rod that the bend occurs, as Justin mentioned. So if the bend is only happening like right at the tip, that's extra fast. And then as it goes down a little bit further, it's fast and then moderate. But you can get any kind of action you want for pretty much any power you want. And then every blank you can imagine. It really is remarkable the amount of choices there are. It's a little bit intimidating for that matter. But they have on their website, they have the recommendations, right? For each blank, they have an overview of what it's generally used for. And then they give the specifics on the power and action and lengths as well.
So for those listening, go for it, Justin.
So I think what's cool about that is that the actions of the rod, you nailed it, Luke. So the rod's intended application, because there's like 8 or 10 different styles of blanks: crankbait rods, live bait rods, spin jigging rods they call their Mag Bass series, their Elite Pro, Elite X. And the actions of these rods and the powers are really designed to meet the needs for the style of fishing. So like a Mag Bass blank could be a 7-foot medium power fast action, but it's going to feel different than like a spin jig blank that's 7 foot medium power fast action. They're all going to feel a little bit different. So when we talk about these manufacturers that make a rod, and we talk about power and action not being universal across the board, even within the blank series or the intended application, the powers and the actions are relative to the technique. So we opted as a generally, we're talking about a little bit more one way or the other when you get to like moderate slow or mod fast or, medium heavy. But for inshore fishing, medium power is a pretty good baseline for a lot of different blanks. I've played and tested with a lot of different blanks at Mudhole and wow, the sister company is escaping me right now. American Tackle. There we go. Yeah. Gosh. Okay. So American Tackle makes, Bushido blanks. They make CBR. Then there's Mudhole has their MHX series. And for the most part, most 7'6" rods, unless they're like a fiberglass construction or E-glass, S-glass, something like that, most 7'6" medium power fast action rods are about the same in all their different classes, but they are still different. I personally have a.
Oh, you have a.
I think we lost him.
What my friend here is trying to say is that love is blind.
It's always, it's what everybody's trying to say.
Yeah, and ta-tong.
And what I think where he was going is just the importance of looking at the manufacturer's listed lure recommendations and line recommendations. And that's really the one thing that usually goes across blank to blank. That one thing they have there is they call it the deflection chart, I believe is the term of it, but they have this chart where you can actually, hang weights on the rods and you basically secure the rods up. This one section, you can do 2 at a time. So you can get 2 rods and put the exact same weight on the tip and then see how the bends are. Sometimes they're one's higher or lower than the other. And you can see exactly what that bend is. The first time I went there, I took a bunch of rods just to kind of show some rods that I've used to help customize the one that we're going to do for our members. And it was shocking. Like one in particular, I brought the TFO, the 7.6 TFO. This is a medium power TFO, medium power fast action. And then another rod that I like is the G Loomis E6X series. But those rods are very light. Like the power rating is much lighter than what the rating is. So I use a 7.6 heavy of the E6X. So I was comparing a heavy fast from E6X to the medium of TFO. And I put it in that device and I hung the same weights on it and they were like almost identical. It was shocking. And so just the unfortunate truth that we can't go by the rating. Yeah, we can't, I like medium rods. And if you do that and stick with it, you can be disappointed, as I have been over the years. So generally I like medium heavy. I got a TFO medium heavy and it was way too powerful than I needed. Even some of these from Mudhole that I've tested, I rarely ever use, I'll say I never use medium light rods. Most of them are all wet noodles, but some of their medium lights actually are my preference. They feel more like the mediums of like TFOs and other brands that I've liked. So it's just what I've learned through all this is to really pay a lot of attention to the lure recommended sizes. And if whatever you're using isn't in that range, then you're probably not going to like that rod. So Justin, we got your back. Nice.
Okay.
Word about you.
So I think what everyone's dying to know is you guys now have these beautiful rods. And I know one thing they do at Mudhole there is they make you name your rods. So what did you guys name your rods?
Name it.
Yeah. Didn't you name them? If I could guess, I would call Justin's bulge. Justin's yours is going to be bulge, and Luke's is going to be allergic to cork, or foregrip. No foregrip.
Mine's blue steel. Man, got that blue look to it. Blue
steel. What's yours, Justin?
Well, now it's got to be Magnum
or bulge.
Fair enough. Can't turn left.
It can't turn left.
I'm not an ambi turner.
Yep. One interesting thing that I just to give just a ton of respect to rod builders who do those fancy little skits, this little work with the yarn. I can't even say it. Yeah, it is shocking how intricate that is. Like when you see all those different designs, or they have like chevron designs, they have all the names for it. That is like a work of art. So for all, and as you can see, mine has none of it. I was just, all right, let me just make one that works. And I don't want to get confused with all the craziness. But some people are doing like the elaborate designs with yarn. It is, hats off to those who are doing that. It's a work of art. So that's the cool thing about doing it. You can add all sorts of cool features that some of the guys.
What is the process? Let's just say you had a couple inches of little bright yellow. I'm envisioning like a bright yellow or red. Okay.
Yeah. So you basically have to like secure both sides, and you're basically just doing all these, you have to wrap it, and it has to be like the perfect distance every time you do the circle, and then you go back and do it again. Like it is shockingly complicated.
And then
however,
you put a layer of epoxy over it to secure it?
Epoxy over it. Because you do the epoxy over it anyhow. Like you have to put the epoxy over all the stuff, and even put like epoxy under the lure keeper just to protect the blank from getting hit. But yeah, I mean, hats off to those who do those elaborate designs. What was the other thing? I had something else. I can't remember what it was.
Meditate on it.
Just the overall ease.
He got it.
Before we close, I wanted to just make sure we talked about how things are complex. Another thing that surprised me was actually how easy it is to do it once you just know the ropes. And so like if you are the type that likes do-it-yourself type things where you build your own stuff, like I personally, I'm a fair weather fly fisherman, but I'll only fish with flies that I tie because they're actually pretty easy to tie, and it's just much more fun to catch something with what you made versus what you bought. But like once you have just the basic knowledge of how to do it, it's actually not too complicated. You just have to have the tools. You can probably get the tools. I ended up buying all the stuff I need to do it myself, and it was under $100. It doesn't have like the fancy stuff, so I can't go out and do a ton of them, but just for making my own, like it's really not as expensive as I thought. But most importantly, it's not as difficult, and you just have to learn just the specifics on how to get the thread on there without having some, crazy bulges or anything. And again, once you learn it, it's pretty easy. Justin, do you feel the same way? That was like one of my big takeaways. Like, man, I can just do this on my own, like really without much issue.
I normally need like, I don't know, 3 or 4 times to really like nail something and know how to do it well. But yeah, in this case, once you figure out how to wrap guides, which I think is the most time consuming process, and you figure out, like, I mean, we have the toolkit. We have just the basic like guide wrapper system. You buy the thread, you buy the epoxy, you buy the guide. Once you buy all the components, I kind of now know the process to wrap it, tie off the knot, and then pull it through the thread and spacing. Like the steps seem daunting, but when you actually do it, it really sticks with you. Like if I needed to build a rod tomorrow, might not be as perfect as the one we kind of have people holding our hands to on the whole process, but I could build a rod now if I needed to do it and I had the components. And you know what? I think some of the, anal retentiveness I have about my rods probably is going to help the rod perform the way as intended, as opposed to some of the mass produced issues that might happen with other mass produced rods. So it's very cool.
It's awesome. Well, cool. I wish I could have gone to that. And good news is they mentioned earlier, Mudhole does this at least every quarter, if not, every month or every other month. But because they do rods for fly fishing to bass fishing, so they have a lot of different types of courses they do. Or is that what they call it? A course or a class? I guess a class is probably the better word. But check them out. That's all at Mudhole on, and they have I believe a section for classes and events, and really, really cool. I'm really pumped. A handful of insiders were able to go. And then as we kind of teased earlier, we're coming out with our own custom rod that we've been building with Mudhole all year, and everything's taking longer, as we all know. Tired of saying it and tired of the excuses, but it is what it is. So we were supposed to have it for Christmas time. It's not even close, by the way. And we're hoping 6 months from now we should have them, maybe 7. So everything's just pushed back so far. But we also want to make it perfect. We want it right and not cut any corners. And so, yeah, sometimes it takes 18 months to get a great rod out to you. And I'm really, really pumped to have that. And make sure if you insider, that'll be insiders only, at least in the beginning. And of course, you'll be able to save. We might even do like 30% off. We talked about, with some of these other ones where we have something new, we might do something really big just to make it a complete, maybe even 40% off if we really, really crazy. But just to go really big on that first few rounds. So another reason to be an insider member is to be another way to save a ton of money and get really, really high quality products. So I'm pumped for that. And a lot of other cool things happening on the Insider Club. Got some new courses. Got some new coaches for next year, and some new tackle as well. And we sent out a survey a little while back, still really going through all of that. And the survey was to our insider members. So thank you for the thousands that actually filled it out. Really, really good feedback. And it's really, what do you, how can we serve you guys better next year? So what kind of content, what kind of tackle, what can we do better in the community, more events? So really, really awesome feedback. So we appreciate you guys. And to join us and the other 26,000 members now, it's all at saltstrong.com and join the Insider Club. Risk-free, 100% money. I mean, it's the way that we wished all companies treated us, right? How awesome would it be that everything you bought or invested in had a 365-day, 100% money back guarantee? Luke, would that be awesome?
Would be awesome.
Justin, would that be awesome?
No brainer.
So that's what we did. So yeah, no brainer. Exactly. So that's what we have. And we've had some people. We had one person. I think it's just, we'll be honest about it. We had one person recently, and it was a female, and she made it to like day 300 and something and asked for her money back. And in her email, and it's no questions asked, she said, "I've actually become a worse angler," which is impossible. And then, we do look, even though the money back guarantee is regardless of, even if you say you don't like Luke's long hair, and we went and looked back, she never even got in. Like, she literally joined and never even watched any of the courses, never was interacting at all, never got in the community a single time. And so apparently she became a worse angler because she didn't actually do anything. It's like getting a gym membership and getting mad at the owners because you didn't lose weight when you didn't show up to the gym a single time. So it's still got to be on you. There's still, and we say that, one, to let you know that we did give her her money back, no questions asked. But two, you got to get in. I mean, you have to go through this stuff. There's no way to become better at anything in life unless you put a little time in. We're going to give you the shortcuts. Like, we're here to shorten the curve. We are here to basically give you 15 to 20 years of experience and shortcuts and how to in a really short amount of time. But you still got to put some time in, right? If you just go through those first couple courses, we're talking about hours of your life to get 15 years of intel. I mean, hours to get years. I do it all day long in anything I want to become better at. And you'll see on that page, if you're not a member yet, all the testimonials. I mean, we're getting new ones pretty much every day in the community. If someone says, "Man, I caught my first slam," or I was a bass angler, now getting in inshore fishing. You guys literally just shorten the learning curve big time. So it does take a little bit of work, but if you put a little bit of work in, you will see some massive results. And even if you don't, we will give you your money back. Even if you're like this one lady, we won't say her name and absolutely embarrass her, but she should be a little bit embarrassed, because if anything made her worse was because she didn't actually try. And like I said, that kind of stuff drives me crazy. So if you're willing to learn and you're coachable and you're fun and you also want to share and be part of an awesome community, it's really like a family, then come join us in the Insider Club. We would love to have you along with other 26,000 members from basically Texas to Virginia and everywhere in between. But obviously we have members in all 50 states and even, I think, 5 different countries now that just want to be around great people and want to always learn and become more consistent. So that's all at saltstrong.com. Luke, Justin, anything else? Mr. Bulge and Mr.
Yeah, I mean, and for those who just really don't have much time, right? Some of the upfront courses are, as Joe mentioned, a couple hours.
Yep.
For those who are just strapped for time, we do have a 10 minutes or less just weekend game plan. So every Friday, a game plan. You should at least have 10 minutes of time to kick back and watch a helpful video. It'll literally just give the synopsis of, hey, what's trending, what fish are biting, what type of spots are they holding in, and why, and then looking at the upcoming weather here's what you should do. Just to help make sure that you're going to the right type of spots. But so we have been doing that, and had some good feedback. But obviously the more time you can put in, the better the results are going to be. But that game plan will just be okay, at least 10 minutes a week, and then you'll be way ahead of the curve for most. It's
like getting on the phone or a Zoom call with a full-time guide for 10 minutes every Friday morning before you're going to go out that weekend, and literally just tells you all the trends. Here's what's happening. Here's what's working. Here's where the bait is. Here's the depth. Here's the types of structure to be looking for, right? It's all about the trends for your area. So if you have 10 minutes a week, because that's really the dead minimum. You have 10 minutes, you will see a massive increase in your fish catching ability. And of course, saving money on the tackle. Like we talked about the rods, got reels, line, lures, terminal tackle, everything. 20% off or more for our members. So that is it, guys. This is a fun one. And we could probably do some follow-up calls. We'll probably need to get some peeps from Mudhole on and maybe even show that chart. I'm really interested in seeing that with a bunch of different rods.
I went ahead and bought one. So next time I go to the office, I'll set it up and we could start doing that. It was eye-opening. It really is. It's shocking to see the difference from one brand, even some within the same brand, like from one different model of rod to another. It's eye-opening.
Cool. Awesome. Justin, anything else for you besides wishing for faster Wi-Fi for Christmas?
Oh, that is top on Santa's list right now. No, again, this is one of those tip of the iceberg conversations. There's a lot more we could talk about, and I'm sure we're going to have more follow-up calls on this too.
Yep. Cool. This was fun. Guys, appreciate you. And we'll talk to you on the next episode. We out. Peace. Whoop, whoop.
'Cause fishing, it's in my soul. It was passed down to me from the days of old. To find us on the water if there was a way. It's been said my papa, he wrote the book on catching big reds and 20-pound snook. I wish I knew all the things he knew today. For he's the reason why we are this way. And he put fishing